everything comes down to the brain. How do we heal people as quickly as possible? And a lot of that has to do with how are we going to make shifts in the brain. With something like psychedelics, it kind of removes that default mode network, that process in our head that we're going in circles, that's keeping us in the same patterns of behavior.
Welcome back to Real Brain Talk with Dr. Guy and Dr. Ken. We're the owners of BrainCore Systems. And we have a special guest today, all the way from Sugarland, Texas. And I love saying it, Sugarland, Texas. We have Dana Gurley. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you for having me, guys.
You're welcome. I wish I lived in Sugarland. It sounds like such a happy place.
Great, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, sugar, how can you go wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah. So Dana, tell all the listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, if you could.
So I am a licensed clinical social worker in Sugarland, and I am, I do all kinds of things, but I own a private practice here in Sugarland. We do mental health therapy. I am a professor. I am in school. I am supervising other clinicians. So it's all about how do we help people.
And you wear a lot of hats doing that.
I do.
Yeah.
You sound pretty busy. Wow. What exactly is your specialty, Dana? So
at the practice, I want to make sure that everybody, all my clinicians that come in here, we're really focused on trauma. Whenever I talk about trauma, I know there's this conception of what trauma is in people's minds. And the way that I think that it's anything that happens in our lives that changes how we think about things. And the best example that I can give, because it's so simple, is if in high school, when you're dating somebody and they cheat on you, the next relationship you get in, you may be expecting them to cheat on you again. And it's those little things that happen in life that can change how we respond to other situations. And so that's the way that I look at trauma.
So it's living in reaction to past events and taking the past events into your present and it being skewed. I'm a very lay person, and I used to study the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And we used to call that
up here. I love that book.
But we would call that the filter system. That's what because it was like you're filtering everything you do through these past events, and it's the goal was to sort of remove that filter. And live in the moment.
Isn't it? It's pretty individualized too. Like one person perceives something as traumatic, but you can have that same situation happen to someone else and that person doesn't see it as traumatic. It doesn't taint their view of future relationships, for instance. And I find that fascinating that one person's trauma could, be someone else's, oh yeah, no problem. That's why when I deal with someone that's, experienced a traumatic event, or even someone who doesn't realize they experienced a traumatic event, you have to really individualize it, for that particular person and how it affected them.
Right. I mean, you and I could be in a car, little fender bender, and we get out, we take care of everything. And you could be like, okay, come on, get back in. And I could be like, I can't get in the car. Like something in that process of getting in that fender bender changed how I am perceiving the world. Now, most people, we overcome those little things that happen like that, but sometimes those little things stick with us,
What about the idea that perhaps there was a traumatic event before your conscious mind was formed, and the reason you won't get in that car is because something happened to you back when you were, a year and a half, 2 years old, that you can only express as a feeling. You can't express it as a conscious thought because you didn't have, the ability at that point to do it. So you only experienced it as a feeling. So there is that possibility that the reason why trauma is so individualized is because maybe there was a trauma, but you don't remember it.
I love that because I literally I say this all the time in therapy now. I went to a trauma conference not too long ago, and one of the speakers that was there That's what she called it. She called it a feeling memory. We may not have that conscious awareness of what that is, but something about the pattern of that experience reminds us of something. And so we react in a way that, out of fear from when we were 1 or 2. And I mean, research is even showing, in utero, when things are happening to the mother, hormones are being flooded to the fetus as it's growing. I mean, so we can get into all of that.
What about generational trauma?
What about 100%? 100%. I mean, and not only can that alter the DNA. I mean, this is getting way big, but alter the DNA. But it can also think about those defense mechanisms that your great grandmother had, and how that great grandmother showed up with your grandmother, and then showed up with your mom. I mean,
right.
We carry that. Yeah, we carry that.
Yeah. So it could actually be at a DNA level. It can actually be at that level. Talk about not having any awareness of a trauma. Exactly. I mean, it could have happened 2 generations ago.
Yeah.
That's wild.
In the 4 agreements realm, we would talk about it as you're like, everybody's poking your wounds, because everybody's got their own pattern of wounds. And when you're out in public, people are just, they trigger the different wounding that you have, built in your subconscious. So it's like, it's just a bunch of society triggering everybody else,
yes,
in their own, specific and particular way.
Yeah. Eckhart Tolle calls it pain bodies. Those are our own pain bodies. Yeah.
That's amazing. So what made you get into, just what drew you to that type of profession? Like where did you come from?
So that's an interesting question. And I have, cause I didn't get into this until late. I'm 53, almost 53 now. And I didn't graduate with my degrees until I was in my late 30s. And, a lot of things happened along the way. I think I always had this innate awareness of other people's pain, even whenever I was young. I could see somebody hurting in class, and I would be like, okay, come and eat lunch with me, or come be my friend, that kind of thing. And then my mom got sick whenever I was younger, and that changed everything. I don't even really know where I was. My brain blocked out a lot of that for a long time. And then in probably my 30s, I just knew there was more. And then, life happens, and I got diagnosed with cancer. And my thought was at the time, because I was pretty sick, it was pretty advanced, or late stage 3. And the odds of me surviving past 5 years was pretty slim. And this was back when I was in my 30s. So apparently I beat those odds, but it really put a spotlight on my life and what I wanted. And somebody who he's actually a preacher that I know, he came up to me, said, well, if you didn't have to worry about money, what would you want to do with your life now that you've kind of been given this gift of feeling better? And I said, well, I'd want to go back and finish my degree and be a social worker. And so that kind of started that whole trajectory. And I know from my own past experiences what trauma was. And so this is how I kind of got into like really studying that. Plus I was an emergency room social worker. So I was seeing traumas as they were happening to people and how people were reacting. And I found that very interesting. And so that's how I got to studying, which is how I got to here and to meet you guys.
Well, I have to thank you for sharing that with us. I know it's a personal thing, and it's very nice of you to share that. Amazing story, really is. It makes me think of that song. I'm not a country music fan really, but that one song, "Live as If You Were Dying." You ever hear that song?
Yeah.
I love that song. It really, it inspires me every time I hear it. But that story kind of reminded me of that. But I was just curious to know, in your actual practice now, what types of trauma do you see? What's the most common type of trauma, and what's the most outlandish trauma you've seen?
Outlandish. I mean, in the emergency room, you see all kinds of stuff. You see all kinds of just crazy stuff, but that's physical trauma. But in my practice, I think that the way that I see it is I see a lot of symptoms of people who are dealing with past events. So this is where depression, anxiety, the symptom stuff comes in. But then you have people who have these really their defense mechanisms that they have. It could be alcoholism, drugs, fighting, eating, like so many things that come from our past experiences that we kind of bring forward and that we use as protection. So, being in what I do, I kind of see everybody with some sort of trauma. Because why do you feel like you need to be angry at everything? So I'm trying to think about, there's so many different people. We see kids, we see people that are grieving. Grief it can be a real traumatic response. I mean, it's very traumatizing learning to live without somebody who's there so we see a lot of that. I think that the most there's also other things. I mean, you have your sexual assault survivors. One of the things that I do with all of my clinicians or all of my clients that I meet, I send them the ACE score, which is looking at childhood trauma, because that, like you were talking about, Dr. Guy, there's things that are happening that you may not realize as to why you're reacting the way that you're reacting right now. So I do that with everybody. And there's a lot of, sexual trauma in childhood and even in adulthood.
Do you find sometimes when you're doing your therapy with these trauma victims that they're reluctant to go back and share the trauma with you, or because I was thinking of how neurofeedback could help in those situations. Do you find that happens a lot?
Yes, because I always think of it this way, and I tell all my clients that come in, because I think that it's very important for you to realize that, and I always do this. So whenever you are here and you start trying to work on getting better, you're elevating, but everything else in your life is still down here. You can't unsee the dysfunction, the how certain coping mechanisms might be, how certain people in your life may be hurting you. You can't unsee that once you start working on yourself. But sometimes people kind of want to go back to their comfort zone because it's a lot easier to be comfortable in, there's some saying like, something about stay with the devil that something like that, than to move forward, because that may mean that all of the things that in your life might not be there with you. Like they may not come back.
It's what makes you you, and you're afraid that if you're not in pain, you may not be you anymore.
Right. Yeah, because even if and I tell people this because some people just come in and they'll just be like, take it away from me. Like, take this away. I don't want to feel like this anymore. And I was like, well, if I were to just take it and remove it right now, you just have a big chunk out of your being and you don't know how to fill it. So my goal is to start shifting that. And this is where things like neurofeedback, psychedelics,
Yeah, let's I
EMDR.
wanted to dive into and ask you, Dana, because I know you use multiple modalities, and we definitely want to talk about the neurofeedback and the BrainCore. But what are the other modalities that you? I mean, is it talk therapy that you're doing, or are you using a specialized type of therapy?
So
Um,
talk therapy is part of it. I think that it's important no matter what other modalities that I use, because even with neurofeedback, if you're doing alpha theta, right? I mean, things are going to start processing, and being able to have that connection and then building that rapport with your client. I think that just really helps facilitate some of that and process it. But I also, everything comes down to the brain. Everything comes down to what are we doing in shifting how people think? How do we heal people? I say this to my clinicians: how do we heal people as quickly as possible? And a lot of that has to do with how are we going to make shifts in the brain? And it's not always, because I am not a believer that you've got to come in and you've got to tell me all of your traumas. I don't believe that, because that could be re-traumatizing. And then I'm sending you on your way home. I'm not going to do that. I won't do that if people don't have coping mechanisms. And some people want to, but I don't, but that's only if they want to. I'm not going to pressure that. But with something like psychedelics, it puts people, it kind of removes that default mode network. It kind of takes it offline, which are those that process in our head that we're like almost the unconsciousness that's going in circles, that's keeping us in the same patterns of behavior,
so it's
these
like
same
hitting
behaviors.
pause, kind of.
Yeah, we can hit pause on that. And then as a therapist, we can integrate, we can talk about it. Like, what does this mean? How do you want to move forward? And that doesn't, that
Can you
talk therapy.
can you
Yeah,
just
that's
tell everybody
really,
what you mean by psychedelics, just so they
yeah.
understand it's
Sure.
yeah.
So there's so many psychedelics that are in research right now. I mean, you could go from, I mean, you could go to Peru and Mexico and do things like ayahuasca, but there's actual trials that are being here in the United States and around the world on psilocybin or mushrooms, MDMA, which is ecstasy. The one that is currently legal is ketamine. And that's the one that's most accessible to most people, because that's being used off label, because it's been around since the 70s as a dissociative anesthetic that's been used in the hospitals. So that's what I mean by psychedelics.
And we're
Anything.
talking about micro dosing, right? We're not talking about full on usage.
I think microdosing, I'm talking about full on usage, like
Okay.
having a
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
time
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
psychedelic experience that um, totally removes that default mode network and allows for you to think of things, see things. And a lot of times that work is internal, or how you feel about the world. And then as a therapist, I can help after that experience is over, because during the experience, I'm not going to be, I want you to experience that. But afterwards, we can talk about, well, what do you think that means?
How long does the experience usually last?
So it depends on the medication that you're using. Not medication, but depends on the route that you're using. So something like ketamine may last an hour and a half, depending on what dosage you take, depending on how you take it. You can take lozenges, you can take a shot, or you can take IV. They even have S-ketamine, which is kind of similar, and you can take it as a nose spray. That's about an hour and a half. The others could be anywhere from 6 to 12 hours.
Are they with you the
I
whole
heard.
time that they do this, or is this something they do
With
on their
ketamine.
own?
So
No.
it's interesting. In my practice, I will be there with you while you're going through all of that. We, if you go to a ketamine clinic, There's a lot of ketamine clinics around that you can see. I'm sure that most of your viewers will see ketamine clinics. They may not always have somebody that's there with you when you go through that, or somebody that helps integrate. And not all. I mean, all places are different. But as a therapist, I'm there with you from the beginning. We'll do certain preparation, like setting intentions. What is it that why are you wanting to do this? And then integrating afterwards.
So DMT, is that the same as ayahuasca? Is that what ayahuasca is?
No. So 5-DMT, the God molecule. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, that is a that's being examined right now, and that is very short. That's like
that's like 10 or 15 minutes,
10,
right?
15 minute use, and then you come back. But
right,
you go talk. What I hear, so, you talk to God.
I was reading a study about how they're using DMT, but instead of just allowing you to come out of the whatever you call it for the first 15 minutes, they were keeping them under for like an hour. Like they were doing an IV DMT, and they were the people would come out of it and they would talk about what they saw. And the interesting thing is that everybody saw kind of the same thing. Like they were seeing different beings and different hieroglyphics, a whole bunch of things that were very similar to each person's individual experience, which I thought was really fascinating. And I think that's why some people say that it opens the door to another dimension rather than it just being something going on in your head. You're actually entering another dimension. And I know this conversation's getting really out there.
It's fascinating. I mean, we could go on forever, I think, talking about this, but I guess we should bring it back to BrainCore. What drew
you? Before we do that, Ken, I want to just share one other study, and I'm not sure if I think, Dan, I think you and I talked about this study where they gave someone a group of people, they gave them psilocybin and they put them in a functional MRI machine, and they wanted to see what was going on in the brain when they were actually doing their experience. And you mentioned the default mode network, which is really kind of like, it's your sense of who you are. That's really what the default mode, and it goes off. It completely shuts down. All the different areas of the brain that make up the default mode network just shut down. And what they found was that areas of the brain that didn't normally communicate with one another were now communicating with one another, which is something you've never seen before in a functional MRI. So something definitely is happening in there.
Yeah.
So it's like
on
a
physiological level. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that that's probably right. You take off the default mode network, and then you allow parts of your brain to reconnect, and then you come back.
So I heard somebody talk about psychedelics. When you take psychedelics, it's almost like, you kind of shut the default mode network off, and it becomes the conductor. It just kind of goes into anarchy, just playing the music in all parts of your brain, which is just really, really super cool.
But afterwards, when they're processing this with you, this is more now from a third person view, right? And then really they're not experiencing their trauma, they're observing it?
Yes. Like you process it differently. And whenever I used to do EMDR before I got into neurofeedback and psychedelics, that's what I always thought. I know EMDR works when you talk about this situation. Now, EMDR, you do have to have an image of what.
But you don't have to convey it.
Correct.
Right. You don't have to talk about it.
Right. And I know it works whenever all of a sudden you're like, yeah, this happened, but you can look at it in this different way, like without that emotional response that goes with it. And I think that that's kind of what you're talking about. Like, you're like this observer of this.
And that's kind of the way we see alpha theta to some degree. It's a sort of that sort of differentiation between the experience and the observing of the experience and the processing that goes with that.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
That kind of brings us into neurofeedback.
Yeah. What made you say, hey, you know what, let me add this tool? Because you got a bunch of tools already.
Right.
What said, hey, you know what, let me add another tool that's different?
So I always new neurofeedback. So whenever you read books like Bessel van der Kolk and just all of the trauma greats that write books on that. I mean, I can't name them all, but there are specific things that you always hear being brought up. You've got the changes in the brain. You've got EMDR, psychedelics, and there was always neurofeedback. And some people are also talking about like hypnosis and stuff like that, which I think that when we're talking about alpha theta, like that's where you're wanting to go, get people to go whenever they're in hypnosis. Yeah. And I think that all of this conversations goes to the brain. And I knew that, like I said before, I want to heal people as quickly as possible. How do I do that? And this was just another tool, because not everybody wants to come in and talk.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't. As a matter of fact, that's a deterrent for a lot of people to reach out for therapy, is because they don't want to come and just like talk to somebody about it. And so what mechanisms do I have, or can I learn about, to help people who don't do that? And so that's how neurofeedback was always on my list. And so after I finished my psychedelic-assisted therapy training certification, neurofeedback was next in line.
And how has it helped your patients? How has it affected your practice?
I mean, this has been the coolest experience, because not everybody wants to come in and do psychedelics and that sort of thing. But the coolest experience is with the neurofeedback. And the way, whenever people first come in, I don't know what's going to happen with it. Like, I know what protocols I need to put down, and, but I'm curious about what's about to happen too, and where we're going to go. And so, and you never know the responses, because everybody responds differently, right? I mean, so, but it has been the coolest experience to watch people come in. And I had a client the other day who has done like 4 or 5 sessions, and they came in and they were like, look, I just want to say this. Okay, I didn't ruminate as much, but I don't want to say that it's the neurofeedback, but I'm just putting it out there. And I was like, okay, you don't have to say that, but we've been working together for 6 months and now this, but okay, we won't say that. We'll just kind of keep doing what we're doing. Right. Uh, and it's that kind of, those subtle reactions that are like really cool for me. Or somebody who's not been able to sleep and they're like, I actually slept better, from one week to the next. Or, I had somebody tell me the other day, because they were trying to explain it. Well, first of all, they're sending me emails over the weekend because I just got to tell you what happened. And this is somebody fairly new into this as well, less than 10 sessions at the time. And like, here's what happened. And this was a person who, whenever I first mapped them, I was like, well, it's showing that there's a lot of anxiety. And they were like, oh no, I've got a whole lot of, like, I got that under control. And I was like, okay, well, maybe you do, right? Your brain's still like holding on to it a little bit, but you probably have learned how to handle that. And I get an email and they were like, I just need to tell you what happened. Somebody needed me to do something last minute. Normally don't do well with that. But I agreed and I did it. And normally, like, all of these things would make me super anxious. All that anxiety, super anxious leading up to it. And then they said, and I did it, and I did what this person wanted. And I just had the best time. I never once thought about, worried about what was going to happen. They had to drive in the rain at one point, which was always a trigger for them. And they were like, I did it and I was fine. And I just needed to email you to just tell you that. And that same person came back to me. And they were like, my creativity is just kind of opened up. And and then they left. They went to go to the restroom or something. They came back and they were like, it's almost like you gave me IQ points. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, it's something we notice with neurofeedback all the time is that the changes are so subtle and so slow that a lot of times the person doesn't even realize that they're changing. And you'll get the people around them, the husband or the wife or this, son, daughter. And I know, Ken, you have a story about this, where they come to you and they're like, whatever you're doing is great because, they're a different person. They're calmer, they're more relaxed, they're happier, and then you ask the person, they're like, I don't really notice a difference. It's amazing how many times you'll hear that kind of story.
Yeah, I actually have a different one than the one I've told before. I had a client who, we were going through the whole BrainCore, protocols and addressing different stuff, and she was very high anxiety, and similar to the kind of the person you mentioned, she couldn't do anything spontaneously. It always had to be like she had to ruminate over it for a month before she could get herself to do it. And she told me the story of going to the dentist, and the dentist said, you need this type of thing done. And usually it would be, I got to wait a month. They're like, plan this for a month, 6 weeks and whatever. And she just said to the dentist, let's do it. Let's do it right now. And the dentist, who had known her for years, was like, who are you? Like, this is not how you operate. And it was just, and she didn't even realize it. It was just this fundamental shift. And
that's a good way of putting it. A fundamental shift. Yeah. It's a great way of putting it. I had another question for you. I know you specialize in trauma and you do talk therapy, and you feel that talk therapy should be part of every case management with trauma. Alpha Theta, very specific neurofeedback protocol that helps people integrate fragmented memories. Tell me how that has helped in your talk therapy practice. In other words, when you are talking to someone that's not doing Alpha Theta versus when you're talking to someone who's actually engaged in Alpha Theta training, how has that changed your talk therapy approach?
Well, that's actually probably one of my most profound experiences with neurofeedback is with somebody doing Alpha Theta. Because whenever we were doing neurofeedback starting, Alpha was off the chart. But this person was saying, I was like, Alpha is like, hey, tell me a little bit, how, like searching for like trauma, something in her background. Nothing. And so we started doing Alpha Theta, and I mean, we're talking in the 20s and 30s Alpha.
That's high. Yeah.
In microvolts. Magnitude.
Yes. Sorry. And there was nothing, like, I don't know, there's nothing I could think of. And we started doing Alpha Theta. And one day they came in and I was like, how's it going? And they just crying. And they're like, I'm a mess. I was like, hold up, we're not doing any more of this Alpha Theta today. Like, we're going to talk. And, for somebody who said they had no trauma, in that one conversation, talked about past history, childhood growing up that had trauma after trauma after trauma in there, but they never identified it. This is why I hate the word trauma, like, and like I like to explain it in another way, because they never identified it as that. They just thought that was life.
Right. Well, they don't know what they don't know, so that's what they know.
Yeah.
That's normal for them.
So having that experience, and then we were able to go through that, and that took several sessions because then when you start processing it, now they were just angry that this stuff had happened in their childhood. And then so we went through that just kind of gradually as we continued on with Alpha Theta after that. And Alpha still stayed high, so we had to switch protocols a little bit, and we finally got it under 14. And we were like, I was crying in the office whenever we finally got it under 14. I know this is so ridiculous. And she was, and we were like high-fiving each other, like we showed that alpha what, I mean, it was just super cool.
Let me give a
So
little
not only did you get an enhancement of your talk therapy, but you also saw a physiological change in the brainwave patterns.
Yes.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Guy, let me just give a little bit of background so that people understand, because we're throwing around things like, alpha and high, right? So the BrainCore system is non-diagnostic, as we always say, but we do see certain patterns. And when somebody presents, especially when you're doing alpha theta, with a very high magnitude of alpha, typically over 18 microvolts, and it stays there, they tend to be somebody who suffers from some sort of trauma in their background, more in a complex nature, like you're talking about, something that they can't really specify. And they also tend to, and I don't know if this person is like that, but they tend to have a very busy, chattery mind. Like they just tend to be, just keeping themselves going, so that they don't have to stop and really address and look at what's going on. And when we get that to drop down to that 14 microvolts or lower, is when they typically will stop. And all of a sudden, that sort of awareness of what they've been doing and what's happened to them starts to come into focus. And that's where the therapy fits in perfectly. Is that that's the kind of person? Were they very busy, chattery, sort of, very occupied?
Yeah. And even in the alpha is what I see is their defense mechanism, right? I mean, they've got to create all of these barriers in their world to protect themselves. And I'm trying to push it down.
Right.
And, but at the same time, because of what I do, I can also give them new defense mechanisms to put in place.
Yeah, you can provide all the coping mechanisms that they need while they're experiencing this.
Yeah.
That's important, because if they don't have that, it can be a little scary, I would imagine.
Yeah, because like, what would you have done if I didn't have my background with that alpha theta? And, and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that y'all would have some suggestions, but just.
Well, we usually recommend they have a therapist that they can talk to.
Yeah, that's.
You're a one-stop shop, but we have a lot of BrainCore providers who,
they have to work with a therapist.
Yeah, so they need to have somebody with them.
Yeah.
Have
some names in your back pocket.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself going now? What direction do you see I know you're so busy, you got so many irons in the fire. Where do you see yourself going now?
I want to build out the neurofeedback more. I'm looking at possibly opening up, we've talked about this, possibly opening up another office in another state with some people. But I also, from the perspective of where I'm at, I'm looking for, I really think about, like, I really do. I know it sounds corny, like I want to heal people as quickly as possible. I get that. But from the behavioral health side, from the anxiety and the depression, I really want to build out a wellness, like a wellness place, but with the main focus being, I mean, body, mind, spirit we have to align ourselves holistically. And I want to explore more of how to do that in my practice, not just the talk therapy, but how do I build it out? And I don't know what that'll look like. So ask me in a year.
I'd like to see it. Yeah, I'm going to take a trip down to Sugarland and check that out.
Oh yeah.
Sugarland as well. I think this is a common theme. I especially when we have these conversations with therapists, people with therapy backgrounds, because BrainCore providers are all types of professions. But it's about access point, and I look at the brain like it's the CPU of the computer. It's the hardware. And then the personality and all those defense mechanisms, everything we've created, that's kind of like the software. So what the neurofeedback does is it addresses the hardware side, and the talk therapy addresses the software side. And they're both access points to help create change. And it works really well when you put those together and you can address from two different sides.
Yeah.
And then you want to help quicker. And I think that's a really
And that
good way to do it.
That concept applies to all different types of things, not just trauma, but all different types of conditions that walk in. Having that access point and being able to access it from both perspectives, that's a really nice way of putting it. So Dana, you didn't always have neurofeedback, right? So you would have a person come in with like a case that you described where they had a lot of anxiety, and the only tool you might have had was maybe talk therapy. How would that case have progressed versus the way you can deal with it now with neurofeedback?
That's a good question. So I think that when people come in here, one of the very first things you have to have about whatever it is that's going on, like if you come through the door, and I always ask, what brought you in? Like, what made you pick up the phone? Because there was some event, something happened that made you pick up the phone and call me. And I know that that's a big deal. But a lot of times, whenever you get down to it and you're like, okay, well, your anxiety made you do this and that, they don't have the awareness to that. And so awareness is a big piece of this. I used to tell my daughter whenever she was a teenager, she's in her 30s now, but when she was a teenager, and I would say, well, do you want to deal with this now or do you want to deal with it in 5 years from now? Because either way, it'll wait for you.
You're gonna, one way or another, you're gonna deal with it.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can either come to this awareness now or later. And so in talk therapy, I just think it takes longer. Could we get there, and could I say the things that make you think about it and realize that maybe your defense mechanisms or whatever you're doing, or you're yelling or overeating or whatever it is that's happening, could I make you aware of it eventually? I think neurofeedback sped that up because there was zero awareness.
So that fits in perfectly with your concept of I want to get people better as quick as possible. Neurofeedback is a tool for that, for sure.
Yes.
That's great. Well, Dana, thank you so much for being here today. This has been remarkable. I've learned so much. It makes me want to go to Sugarland. Absolutely.
I want to go to Sugarland just for the name. And
I know.
adding everything else is even is like,
come on, I'll show you around.
We appreciate all that you've shared. We appreciate you sharing that personal story, which that was beautiful. And I am so glad that you're still with us and everything is fine. Hopefully we'll have you back again. I'd love to hear more about, some of the experiences you've had, especially with the microdosing. But thanks again for being here, and thanks for being a BrainCore provider. We honor you and cherish you.
Well, I am so honored that y'all considered me to be a part of this and to come and talk to y'all. I have had nothing but a positive experience with BrainCore, with all of you guys. I mean, you're there. I email, y'all are there. I mean, that's everything to me. As I continue to grow. So I want to thank y'all. And I'm just super honored to be here today.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
All right. See you next time.
All right.